a couple or about a minute early. So I'm here. If you haven't been to my channel before, I'm Patience. I do sewing tutorials, some of my patterns, some of whatever patterns interested me in the moment. And right now, where did I put it? Oh, I have this is the pattern I'm working on right now. This is the On the Go 2.0 bag, and it's by Annie. And one thing that stands out differently from ByAnnie patterns versus others is the fact that we quilt the fabric. So, so all right. So we have the fabric that we quilted last week. There's the one side, and then we have the other side. This is the lining side. This is the exterior. So just to show you how I do this, I'm not going to show measurements because that's going into the specifics of a pattern. This is how I label a lot of times when I have a lot of square or rectangular pieces, which most by Annie's are. This one is how I label it. I will pin, at least if it's not vinyl. If it's vinyl, you don't pin, you use a clip. But I will pin the what the piece is. And I have my measurements on it as well, which was why I'm covering it up. But I've got it pinned to the back. So there's my front. So today I am going to prep some of the pockets and we will get started. And then next week we will put together the flap and some of the card slots that are on the inside. And I will also talk about how to make your own bias binding. Just not doing that today. And we don't need it initially, so we will do that next week. Now, just if you have the pattern and are following along, I don't always go exactly in order because actually the next step in the pattern would to be to sew your bias binding, which the way they have you do a bias binding is you cut a square and then you sew it and then you do it, and I do it a little differently, and I do continuous bias binding, and so I'll explain how I do that at a next week. That'll be our plan for next week, is to show you how to do bias binding. All right, so the first thing we're going to do, this bag has a, just to show you yet again, it has a zipper pocket on the flap as well as a slip pocket that is vinyl. However, in the instructions, it actually says that you can use it your quilted fabric as well. So that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do a vinyl front window because I want to show the fabric more. But you also have on the back, if you can see right here, this is a vinyl ID window. I am going to do that with vinyl, but just to show you, so this is my fabric. This is the vinyl I'm using. Still translucent, but it gives it a nice purple color. Sorry for that. Still trying to figure out some of the. All right. So, are there any questions so far? And let me grab my computer so I can see any of the questions that we may have. Apologize for that. Thought I had all that. All right. So, if you ever do buy any patterns, I have not done a any pattern that really has pattern pieces. They give you measurements as well as like tell you to round this corner or something like that. So, and that's actually if you've ever done one of my patterns, that's how I prefer to do them as well. So I guess it's kind of a comfort thing. And I actually like doing rectangles and squares and all of that stuff. No, I'm playing with the things. I'm still learning how to do all the YouTube. So yeah, it did a green screen. So that's all that is. All right. So for the first thing, we are going to prepare the flap pockets. So like I said, there is a front slit pocket and then there's also a zipper pocket. So what we have is I have the two pieces. So I have my flap pocket. And so if you can see, it actually will fit like that when I'm done. What we're going to do is put binding up here, and then the zipper will be up here. Okay, so what we're going to do first is the zipper. Now, you actually make your zipper, it's actually longer than we actually need it. Because if I show you here just on how wide it is, it's a lot wider. But what you'll do is you'll sew it to it and then trim it down. Now, if you've noticed, you'll notice the top part is serged here. And the reason I do this is so that it lays, if you notice, it lays flatter and it gets rid of any of the excess, like scraggly bits of the fabric or foam. Since we quilted, you have your foam right here. So just to show you the difference on how flat it is. And also, if you're going to have any like stray threads, they're not going to show. So the way you do this is that now it says to already have your zipper pull on there. I find it's actually easier to sew it without the zipper pull and then slide it on. So I'm gonna take my little pin out. Like I said, it's just my measurements wherever I set that pattern bag before. It's called, I'm gonna lose my head if I don't watch it. All right, so we have our piece. And now I don't serge everything. If it's being bound, like has bias binding, it's going to be contained. But if it's up, so basically what we're going to do is that you actually take the zipper and you put your right sides together at the top here. So you're going to line them up and you're going to sew it um, with about a quarter-inch seam allowance, right sides together. And so then I will actually fold that up, double checking that it was a quarter-inch, but usually it is. But you're gonna sew that at a quarter-inch seam allowance. So I'm gonna take you to the machine now, and you can listen to me talk. All right. So now, if you feel better, you can actually pin it. I just kind of center it. So as you can see, I don't normally pin, and I don't worry about those serger tails. You can trim those back. Those were just me taking it on and off the serger. And actually, but they're gonna be bound up. So I don't worry about it. They were more for my convenience and how nicely it'll fit. So I'm gonna take that and I make sure they're even with each other, but you can pin. I just don't a lot of the time, especially when you have excess zipper tape and you don't have to cut it that big. The thing just said to cut it from minimum of this amount, so but you're gonna trim it off, just going by what I did last time. So I'm sewing it at a quarter-inch seam allowance. Okay, and we just go and sew that where it's even. And that's one reason I do the serged ends because I'm not gonna have any scraggly um, threads hanging down. So just to show you, it is sewn. So I'm gonna trim my threads. Then what we're gonna do we're going to finger press, and we're going to actually sew from the lining side. So we're going to fold this down here, and we're going to sew at the very edge of the zipper tape. And that's why it's good to have the same fabric, not fabric, same thread in your bobbin and top, so you can go back and forth between the two. And I'll show you how smooth this makes this. Trying to hold my thread and it's not wanting to cooperate. Okay. Okay. And we are going to take our time to go through it, just so that everything lays flat. And I'll show you why again, why I serged this. This is not, they do not say to serge it or to finish that seam, but that seam is raw. So I serged it just for the sheer fact, and I'll show you why. Trim our threads. Okay, so nice pretty top stitch there from the front. And on the back, you can see where I have the serge. So it's got a little bit showing, but it's not a raw edge. It's not got like little scraggly, I guess you could call it that, but it gives you that nice pretty straight top stitch. So so now we have that done. Now what we're gonna do is I'm going to actually set that to the side for right now and grab my binding that I put at the top of this pocket. It actually has binding. I just got to find which one it is. There we go. Okay, and so this is my binding. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to actually, now this is not our bias binding. This is a separate um, piece, and now they suggest not pressing it. You could press it to make it lay flat, but it stretches more, I think, if you do that. So what we're going to do, you want it, this is the same width as our pocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually make sure it's even with the other side on the back side. In other words, your wrong side of your zipper tape. Now here, I'm actually going to pin because I want to hold it in place. And what we're going to do, we're going to sew it again, add a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fold it over to the front after that. This is one form of bias binding or binding. It's not so much bias binding because this is not cut on the bias, but this was cut straight as per their instructions. Okay. Now we're going to sew that at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay. I pull out my pins as I get to them. Some things are more fiddly than others, so that's when I will use pins. You're not required to use pins. You can use clips. You can use just your fingers. I still kind of check it as I go. That's why I'm not going super, super fast. Okay. So we sew that on. Trim my threads. Okay. So as you can see it from the front, so what we're going to do is we're going to take and fold it over the zipper tape, and it will cover the stitching that we just stitched. Make it look all nice and pretty. And you can pin it, you can clip it. So I will pin it, and then you're going to sew it down at an eighth of an inch seam allowance, basically top stitching it down. And this gives us a nice, pretty zipper. Now, if you notice, I still do not have a zipper pull on there, and that's intentional, because if I had a zipper pull, then I'd have to move it out of the way while I'm sewing. So now I will stitch this down using an eighth of an inch seam allowance, and I will show you when I am completed. And if you see, I am holding it, I'm kind of going slow so that I can make sure I'm covering that stitching from previously. So we have a nice smooth line. Gotta love when things want to be difficult and keeping them straight, which is why you use those seam allowance markings at our presser feet, so that when we sew it the first time, it's nice and straight. So when we're doing this part, we can cover those stitches and it'll be nice and straight with our binding. Okay, and as you see, I go a little slower when we go do this, just to make sure I catch all my where I want to catch. Okay, all right, and let's trim our threads. Oh, I have forgotten to put a zipper pull many times. Not so far that I've closed it up, but I have forgotten a couple times for that. And that's when you learn how to put a zipper pull on, not the conventional way. So there we go. We have the binding. Yeah, I know it's a different fabric, but this is the binding. So all the bias binding that'll be going around the flap is going to be this same. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, so I do not forget it, is to put our zipper pull on. And what's great about this, since now I have it on, well, both of these fabrics are from the Untamed line of the new Tula Pink line that came out in November. I love them. So, so we are going to, as you can see, I have my nice pretty flower zipper pull. Now, this is the main one on the outside. So just to show you what it looks like comparatively, I like how it goes. I actually have a different color zipper pull for the main bag that is under the flap. It's actually like this color fuchsia, and they're ring zipper pulls instead. So, but yeah, these are both part of the Untamed line of Tula Pink. So what I do when I actually pull zipper pulls is I will actually look at them and see, are my two sides of my tape even? And as you can see right here, they are. You can see them sticking up. They're even with each other. So I will pull it on. And what's good now, since this is done sewing up here for the most part, and mostly this, I will have to top stitch up here, but see, that's not going to be in the way of the zipper when I attach this to the main flap. As you see, my zipper pull is now on there and out of my way. So now we are going to do the slip pocket here. And like I said, I decided to do a um, overlap of the same fabric, and it's going to be broke up by the same binding. So we're going to do this, and what we're going to do is take my little pin out. Like I said, for each one, I have, like, that is my flat pocket B, and B is the split pocket. So, and let's see. Then I will grab my pocket B binding. Like I said, it has place for all of that, and I'll label them all. Makes my life simpler. So now you're going to do it the same way like we did the zipper tape. We're actually going to sew it from the lining side and flip it over and stitch it down on the front. So like I said, a lot of times when I'm doing any type of binding, now when I do bias binding, I don't do it as much because I'm usually following around the outside. But since these are not bias binding, it stretches differently, and I don't want them to stretch. And that's why you usually cut your binding on the bias so that it doesn't move. I said a lot of this today is prepping different pockets. Okay, so that is the back side. Now this is not this is part of the Roar collection. If anybody's wondering, this is the collection that came out in April. That was all the dinosaurs. But if you notice, Tula Pink matches Tula Pink. So yes, I have. And if you haven't noticed, I have a fascination with Tula Pink fabric. So we're going to stitch that on at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Yet again. And I could have serged the top of this one as well. I did not, because it is going to be bound. So you're not going to see that raw edge. So just to show you the difference, once I get this sewn, I will show you what it looks like without me serging and what it would have looked like up against that zipper. So just to show you, if you can see, it has kind of frayed. It's not as easy to basically squish it down. So what we're going to do, actually going to trim the thread. We're going to fold it over to the other side. And I'm actually going to use clips here. Sometimes clips are better, sometimes pins are better. So depending on the day and or not even the day, the piece I'm working on, I will use clips. And I will be working on the ID window. And since that is vinyl, you almost pretty much have to use clips. So I will clip that. Need one more. And when I do clip, I usually use a good number of clips just to hold it down like I want it to stay down. And apparently forgot to trim the threads over here, so I got two little tails that are looking at me through the thing. So we will start and we will stitch this down. I said anytime you're sewing binding, it's just to get as close as you can to the edge, around an eighth of an inch. And this is covering up our stitching we did in the previous step. And this is encasing our raw edge. And I'm just pulling the clips off. They're under my hand as I get to them. So in some ways, sometimes the clips are easier than pins, sometimes, but that's not always the case. Okay, just to show you, I will trim all my threads. Okay, so here is our freshly bound pocket, the top. This is our slip pocket. So now we're going to actually take and we are going to line that up with the previous zipper pocket. Now I know you're saying, well, there's no actual pocket to the zipper, but what we're going to do is we're going to attach it to the flap. So what I'm going to do is I make sure these are even, and I'm going to clip the, and this, I'm going to pin them together because I don't want them to move. I'll make sure to do that on the other side. So a lot of today is just prepping the next part, basically. And most of our one for next week will talk about how to make your own continuous bias binding. I will have it partially started because it takes a while, and I'll explain it as we go. So as you can see, I've got it pinned in place, and so now I'm going to stitch around using an eighth of an inch seam allowance, so you won't see that, and that'll become one piece, and you will have a slip pocket. So we'll sew that together real quick. Right. Now I'm sewing this, like I said, about an eighth of an inch seam allowance. And for those who've not been here, I have a narrow foot on my machine, so if I have it right to the edge of my foot, that is an eighth of an inch seam allowance. And this machine, the Juki TL18QVP, has the option of a narrow fit. And I use that a lot because not only can you use it with zippers, but I use it with basting a lot. I like to baste at an eighth of an inch at a lot of bags, like when you baste foam or in other interfacings, or even basting pieces together. And I use clips and sometimes, and like I said, I've said before, sometimes I use staples. Not so much on a fabric bag because it will tear. So I use pins or clips for fabric bags. But for vinyl bags, I will use staples, especially if they're in the seam allowance. So just to show you, we now have a fully functional flip pocket. And this is the front of the flap. Oh, I use it for tiny doll clothes too. So as you can see, I will set that to the side. That we're done with that for tonight. Now the next thing is to make the, we will go ahead and prep the back pocket. So I have another piece that's quilted, the lining. I've got to take my little pin out of it. And I'm going to get my back pocket binding a little bit wider. Now I have not done this bag before, so if you see any snafus, you're seeing them as I do. All right, so like I said, when I'm doing just binding like this, I will pin it in place. And I'll pin. We're going to sew this yet again at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I said a lot of this kind of stuff is just getting things prepped and ready. Okay. And we are just sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance yet again. Trim our threads. And now this bag has where you can make your own strap and it tells you how to do the strapping, the tabs. However, I am using Tula Pink webbing. I have a, let me grab it and I can show you. And I'm going to be using the smaller variety for the tabs. But because I prefer for myself 1.5 inch wide webbing for crossbodies. So just to show you, this is the um, webbing I have going with it. The smaller variety is a pink that's 1 inch wide with the teal stripes. And it's similar, so I can show you the style when we're done, how they coordinate with each other. So yet again, we're going to fold it to the front. And we're going to clip it in place. Having random threads come off. And so this is all just time consuming. It's not necessarily hard, but it looks so pretty in the time that it takes. Now I will not fold over without clipping or pinning in some way, shape, or fashion, because then that calls for trouble. Something's not going to get to the right depth as far as folding. See, little random pieces of thread that are falling off the edge from where we've quilted and it's fraying. We clip that in place and we're going to sew that again at a eighth of an inch. My thread is trying to be a little screwy. There we go. Wanting to come out of my needle. All right, so we are going to sew that. And this is sometimes when a stiletto comes in help to help hold it down. I said it's just to make sure that you are covering the stitching you did before. And one other reason we did not go ahead and just make the entire flap, other than the fact that we need bias binding, is the fact that I've got to find my sew-in magnets again, and if not, order some. So we're going to trim. So there is our back pocket. So now, actually, because I've got it bound, I'm actually going to clip my thing that says this is the back pocket back onto it, just so I know what it is. And I do that sometimes. It's not a bad thing to just clip it back to it and say, oh, that's my back pocket again. And then I will set that to the side. So the last thing we're going to do tonight before I finish up with y'all is I'm going to bind my window. This is a vinyl window. It is a 12 gauge, if I remember correctly. It is from My Punk Embroidery, which is one of my favorite vinyl suppliers. So we are actually going to bind each of the smaller sides first. Well, there are different types of magnetic closures. There are sew-in, and there's also ones that have the feet. Sew-in ones that you actually sew them into your thing, and they are hidden, which are kind of cool. So what we are going to do, we're going to go from the back side. Now this one, the back side is actually shimmery. It has a rough part to it, and it's smooth on the outside. I can go over magnetic closures sometime. I will definitely go over it with this bag as to, and as you see, I am using clips because this is vinyl, and if you use pins, you will leave holes. Unless you are so confident that you can get it inside the seam allowance. But better not to chance it. But yeah, I can go over magnetic closures, how to install one, what the different types are at some point in the future. But this one particularly uses a sew-in, and like I said, I have some, just not exactly sure where I've put them. So I will have to remedy that in the or order some more. So we got the first side on. Now I use magnetic closures all the time in wallets. I don't normally use magnetic on sew-in on wallets. I usually use actual decorative ones. So yet again, we have our 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our fabric, cover our stitching, flip it down, and all the way across. And we're going to stitch that down yet again at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay. So we trim our threads, and we're going to do same thing on the other side. So we take our other short end, I'm going to clip it in place from the back side yet again. And so, yes, you can bind vinyl. I know not everybody will, but you can bind vinyl. You can do about anything with vinyl just as well as you can. But like I said, this is supposed to be an ID window, so you want something that's see-through. Or say you wanted to put a business card in it or something like that. Okay. And I'll throw this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But definitely I can go over. I know I've done turn locks. Magnetic closures are not much different except there are several different types. Then you have also snap closures, which you have the fashion snaps, you have cam snaps, you even have rivet snaps. I have magnetic rivet snaps, which I love using. And I use that with my table press. So yet again, so we have, I'm going to fold over again. I'm gonna clip it in place and we're gonna top stitch again. Clip it down. And I know I put a clip on and I just moved it just right away, but that was just more to hold it there until I could get it under the foot. And I will take the other clips as I get to it. And I'm still using the pastel variegated thread. So you could use a coordinating thread so that it's not as visible if you don't want your top stitching as visible. Just trimming my thread. So now we have an ID window that is partially bound. We're going to actually bind on the top and bottom. Okay. And I am going to Now this one you have, if you notice, it's longer. This has an inch and a half on each side, but I will not be binding. I need to put it from the back on either side of the ID window. So that's one thing I will. And if you've noticed, I have measuring on my sewing machine, which is awesome. And I use that all the time. So I will clip it in place and make sure and actually use a ruler as well. I have my sparkly little ruler, which is from Mormino. Um, if you come from the Facebook to follow me, then she writes patterns and she writes some really awesome patterns. She wrote the Emily tote, which is a really good tote bag pattern and one that my customers love. And so I'm going to clip that in place. Now, one difference here is to make sure I'm just going to measure here. That should be inch and a half, and this should be an inch and a half. That's an inch and a half on each side. And just to double check, 1.5 and 1.5. So what's going to be different about this one is that we are going to actually start sewing up here, and then we're going to bind it to itself, basically. One more clip. I'm going to make sure that it is folded and that end is under right at that 1/4 inch seam allowance yet again. Okay, and we just take our time. And you could clip on both sides of binding on at the same time and then sew them both to the other side. But I find I like doing one piece at a time. Okay, so it's a little different. All right, so we're going to fold it to the front. And I'm doing it around the vinyl window first, mainly because I can make it nice and tight. I love using variegated thread, especially like you can see, same sides. This one's kind of blue, this one's kind of pink and purple. until we make sure on the when it's folding into itself that the raw edge of the binding is encased. And this is where I will use a pin. I will say if you're buying variegated thread, there are lots out there, but I will say I'd like um I get all mine from Wizardry, um, Stitchery, and if you need to go to that website, that is geekyhardware.com. So I've got it pinned, and I'm going to stitch all the way across, top stitch it. Pulling the pin slightly out. Not a lot to hold on to, so like I said, kind of holding it, make sure that raw edge is encased on where it's just the fabric. And now I am doing it over the vinyl. Okay, and I just hold that in place till I get to the end. Now that my pin is out of it. Oh, now we're not trimming this or anything right now. And if you notice, I didn't trim my zipper yet either. And I will do that when it tells me to, which is usually after you attach it to the next piece. I'm just trimming my, so just to show you, and just on the back side. And we're going to do that for the bottom, and then we will be done for tonight. So yet again, make sure you're putting it on from the back. Okay. Now this is a little easier because we have where it is even with the other one. But just to make sure, I'm actually going to do it the easy way. One easy way to do this is to go ahead and mark it at that 1.5 inch mark on either end and pin it. And then you can put it right up next to that vinyl. Make it easier. Okay, and I'll do that on the other end. For the TL 18 QVP, I use 45 if I'm using it from there. Um, I've gone down to as low as 35. A lot of Guterman, I think, are 40 or 30 to 40, depending on what you're using. But just to show you, so that's my 1.5 inch on either side. Let's do, and so if you see, when I have my pins in the right place, they're on either side of the vinyl window, and that means I know it's exactly at 1.5 inches. Makes my life a little simpler than kind of guesstimating. So I'm going to clip it in place at the edge and do the same over here. The other side, and then clip all the way across. Now, if you notice when I'm doing vinyl, I use more clips. Things like to move more. And I'll take it over and do our 1/4 inch seam allowance yet again. Okay. I'm making sure everything's equal as I get um to that part on it. Make sure that it's even edges to edges. Otherwise, I will have some weird overlap. And I'm about to get to the edge of my vinyl and close up this binding. Let's trim our threads, take out that pin, and we are going to fold it over. Oh no, that's no good. Well, if it comes down to it later, you should be able to go and rewatch it when it's not tiny. Even if it's not live, if you need to go back and rewatch it, you should be able to watch it without it being tiny. It takes a little time for it to upload from being alive. Okay. And I'm going to, as I said before, since this is fabric on fabric and they like to shift a little more, I'm going to pin it on both ends. And I will do the other end. And this encases those raw edges that we had. Okay, so got it clipped. I'm going to top stitch it. And we're going to get that attached. And once I can get my pin to not be screwy. Let's see, let's push this down a little further. Mainly because it's getting in the way of the clip. And that's the problem. It's not wanting to lay flat. Isn't that lovely? Okay. And we're going to sew this at 1/8 of an inch top stitch. Okay, we are going to pull that pin out of the way. Let's take our time. So our eighth of an inch seam allowance here, or should I, well, top stitch, eighth of an inch top stitch. Okay. We're going to trim our threads at each end. Okay. And we have our finished ID window. So there's on the front and back. So like I said, I've not made this one before. Whoops. So I'm not exactly sure how that attaches on. So we'll find that out together. But there is our clear ID window. And just to show you um, how the Tula Pink webbing coordinates. So you have the 1.5 inch and the 1 inch. So they're um, flip flopped in the smaller. So have some of the smaller of the teal and pink that's going to go for this back. I'm going to use this for the actual strap, but for all the like tabs, like right here, that will be with the smaller variety. But that should definitely be here for next week. So, are there any questions for right now? And I will stop for tonight, and we will pick up again next week. And we will be doing more of this particular bag.